The alien ship hovered quietly above Earth's atmosphere, hidden by the clouds that shielded it from prying human eyes. Inside, on the command deck, a soft hum echoed through the quiet space. The ship was vast, ancient, and dignified, its sleek design a testament to centuries of advanced civilization. Yet, within the heart of this marvel of technology, one of its crew members, a young diplomat named Kayla, was trembling. The soft hum of the ship's engines did little to calm her nerves. She was terrified. Her assignment? To meet the humans, those so-called savages who had long captivated the attention of the galactic community. It was a diplomatic mission, meant to initiate peaceful relations with the species that had only recently discovered the vastness of space. She had studied their history, their cultures, their art, and yet nothing prepared her for the overwhelming feeling of dread that twisted in her gut as she prepared to step onto their soil. Kayla had been raised among her people, a race known for their grace, wisdom, and technological superiority. To them, diplomacy was a delicate dance, one that relied on patience, subtlety. The humans, on the other hand, were unpredictable, emotional, often violent, and prone to conflict. Their very existence seemed to challenge everything Kayla had been taught about the natural order of the universe. And yet, there was something about them, something that pulled at her, something that sparked curiosity and, dare she admit it, a strange kind of attraction. As the ship descended into Earth's atmosphere, Kayla couldn't shake the images of humans she'd seen in the reports. Their faces were so varied, their expressions so raw and unguarded. She had watched videos of their battles, their cities, their everyday struggles, and somewhere within that chaos, a flicker of something deeper had drawn her in. The mission was simple. Approach the humans, offer the peace of her people, and avoid any hostile interactions. But the reality was far more daunting. What if they reacted with violence? What if they saw her, not as a diplomat, but as an invader? The thought of it made Kayla's heart race. She had always been the quiet one among her kind, reserved, shy even. And now, as the ship prepared to land on the surface, she could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. Outside, the human world was a strange mix of beauty and chaos. The forests and mountains were breathtaking, yet the cities sprawled with such disorder that they made her uneasy. Humans, it seemed, lived in a constant state of tension, ever on the edge of war and peace, their emotions often driving them into acts of both great kindness and brutal cruelty. Her mission would take her to a remote outpost in the wilderness, where she would meet a human representative, a diplomat, much like herself. She had read all the reports. This human, an experienced negotiator, was said to be wise and fair. But Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This diplomat, as skilled as they were, was still human. And if history was anything to go by, the humans had a way of throwing plans into disarray at the most unexpected moments. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and Kayla's heart skipped a beat. The air outside was thick with anticipation, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door. She had been briefed on human customs, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming sensations she was about to experience. The heat of the sun, the sound of distant voices, the smell of the earth, it was all so foreign, so alive. The door opened, and Kayla stepped onto the earth for the first time. The ground beneath her feet felt solid and firm, but it was the sight of the humans that truly took her breath away. A group of them stood nearby, their eyes fixed on her. They were so different from her own species, shorter, stockier, their skin in a variety of colors and textures. But it wasn't just their appearance that caught her attention. It was the way they looked at her. Their expressions, a mix of curiosity, wariness, and something else she couldn't quite place. Her stomach fluttered with nervousness. She had heard stories of how humans could be fierce. And yet, in this moment, she was overcome by a strange, inexplicable feeling. Was it fear? Or was it something else, something deeper, something unsettlingly magnetic? One human, a man with dark hair and a broad frame, stepped forward. His eyes locked onto hers, and Kyla felt a jolt run through her, a surge of something powerful and inexplicable. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching her with a guarded expression. But there was something in his gaze, something that made her heart beat faster. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was fascination. Kayla hesitated, unsure of what to say, but the man spoke before she could gather her thoughts. His voice was deep, rough, marked by an intensity that sent another shockwave through her. "You're the alien diplomat, right?" She nodded, her throat tight. "Yes. I'm Kayla, representative of the Vanyari Confederation."
His eyes flickered at the name.
"You came here to talk." The question was simple, yet the weight of it seemed to hang in the air between them. The humans had a way of cutting through the formality, of getting straight to the heart of things. Kayla, for all her training and preparation, suddenly felt small. She had expected to face a cold, calculated negotiator, but instead, she was confronted by something far more raw and unpredictable. "I came here to offer peace," Kayla said, her voice softer than she intended. "To avoid conflict." The man stared at her for a long moment, and in that silence, Kayla couldn't help but wonder what was going through his mind. Did he believe her? Was he weighing her every word, trying to decide if she was a threat? Or was he, like her, caught in a strange magnetic pull that neither of them fully understood? Before she could speak again, a sudden noise broke the tension. A loud crash echoed through the trees in the distance, followed by shouting. Kayla's heart leaped into her throat. The human seemed unfazed, but her instincts kicked in. There was no telling what could happen next. "Stay here," the man said, turning to leave. "No," Kayla said before she could stop herself. I want to help." His eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Kayla thought he might object. But then, surprisingly, he simply nodded. "Follow me." As they began to move toward the source of the noise, Kayla's mind raced. This was the moment where everything could change. Would her people's peaceful mission succeed? Or would she be caught in a dangerous game of human emotions, where attraction and fear were tangled in an unpredictable dance? And, more pressingly, could she resist the pull of this human standing beside her, so close yet so far away? Kayla followed the human diplomat through the dense woods, her heart still racing from the strange encounter. The ground was uneven beneath her feet, the cool air carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. The man moved swiftly, his heavy boots crunching on the forest floor, but he never looked back to check if she was still there. It was almost as though he didn't care whether she was able to keep up. Or maybe, just maybe, he was trying to distance himself from her. Kayla tried to focus, trying to suppress the fluttering sensation in her chest. She was here to do a job, not to get distracted by feelings she couldn't explain. She had spent years studying diplomacy, mastering the delicate art of communication, especially with species as unpredictable as humans. Yet, there was something about the way the man looked at her, something about his presence that was proving far more difficult to ignore than she would have liked. The sounds of the forest were now accompanied by distant shouting, which only grew louder as they pressed on. Kayla's mind raced. The Vanyari Confederation had sent her here for peace. She was meant to represent her people's desire for cooperation with humanity, to avoid further conflict between their species. But the more time she spent among these humans, the more she realized how fragile that peace might be. It wasn't just the diplomat she had met earlier who made her feel on edge. It was the air of tension that seemed to hang over every interaction with them. She glanced at the man beside her. His broad shoulders and hardened expression suggested a lifetime of dealing with conflict, of being the first to jump into a fight if the situation demanded it. It was strange. She had never thought of diplomacy as something that involved physicality. But as she looked at him, she couldn't help but wonder if the humans relied on their fists just as much as their words. They came to a clearing where the sounds of shouting grew more distinct. Kayla caught sight of a group of humans gathered around a small campfire. There was chaos, with people scrambling, shouting orders, and several figures circling each other, their movements quick and erratic. One of them was waving a large branch, a makeshift weapon, while another was attempting to shield themselves behind a pile of rocks. "Get down!" The man beside her hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her to the ground. His grip was firm, but not unkind. She couldn't help but notice how his touch sent another pulse of heat through her body, a sensation that unsettled her more than the shouting around them. She quickly pushed the thought away. Now wasn't the time for distractions. Kayla's mind spun. This was what she had feared. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but this was something else entirely. Was this the kind of savagery she had been warned about? A violent, senseless altercation in the middle of the forest. The people around the fire weren't just fighting. They seemed to be driven by something more primal, something almost animalistic in nature. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the noise. The man next to her didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the scene in front of them, his jaw tight. "They're not supposed to be here," he muttered under his breath. "A few of them got lost, probably ran into a wild animal. They've been panicking." Kayla raised an eyebrow. Panic. The word stuck with her. It wasn't just fear of the wild. This was something deeper, something that seemed to root itself in the way humans responded to fear. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, there was something oddly captivating about the way the humans moved. Even as they bickered, even as they shouted at each other, there was a raw, unrelenting energy to their actions. It was a kind of strength that Kayla hadn't anticipated. "Shouldn't we intervene?" she asked. "Help them?" The man glanced at her sharply. "You don't understand," he said. "This is what they do. This is how they are. Their strength comes from their ability to fight, to survive. It's instinctual." Kayla's breath caught in her throat. It was a strange way to describe humanity, but something about his words felt true. These weren't just frightened humans. These were survivors. Survivors who seemed to thrive in chaos, even when they were at their lowest. It was unlike anything she had seen in her own species. The Vanyari were peaceful, disciplined, careful with every move they made. But here, in the forest, the humans were raw, unfiltered, alive. Her thoughts were interrupted when one of the humans in the clearing let out a loud, primal scream. It was sharp and filled with desperation, and Kayla's chest tightened at the sound. She wasn't sure what to do. Her instincts told her to retreat, to keep her distance, but another part of her, an unfamiliar part, wanted to act. She wanted to step forward, to reach out, to make everything stop. "Stay down," the man beside her said, his voice a low growl. "Wait for it to pass." But Kayla couldn't stay still. Something was stirring within her, something that urged her to move, to help. She was no warrior. She wasn't equipped for combat, for physical confrontation. But the panic she had felt earlier, the fear that gnawed at her, was beginning to shift. It was no longer fear. It was curiosity, a desire to understand. Before she could think better of it, she stood up, ignoring the man's warning. The sounds of fighting grew louder, and a knot formed in her stomach. Her people had never experienced anything like this. The way these humans fought, the way they feared, it was all so alien to her. But it was also magnetic. It pulled at something deep within her that she couldn't explain. Without thinking, Kayla stepped forward, her legs carrying her closer to the group. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breaths came faster. She was doing something she hadn't planned, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She had to see it for herself. "Wait," the man shouted from behind her, but she ignored him. As she approached, she saw one of the humans turn toward her, his face twisted in panic, eyes wide with fear. It wasn't the look of someone who was simply fighting for survival. It was the look of someone who had lost all sense of control. He took a step toward her, and Kayla's heart stopped in her chest. Was he going to attack her? Was she in danger? But then, just as quickly as the fear had appeared, it vanished. The human stumbled, almost collapsing to the ground, his body too weak to keep standing. Kayla instinctively reached out to steady him, her hands touching his skin, feeling the warmth of his body beneath her fingertips. In that moment, everything stopped. The chaos, the panic, the tension had all faded into the background. Kayla's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with the human. His face was a mix of confusion, exhaustion, and something else, something she couldn't quite place. It was as though the raw, wild energy of the moment had transformed into something personal, something that spoke directly to her. For a brief, fragile second, Kayla felt a connection she couldn't explain. The diplomat, the savage, the alien, the human. All of it seemed to blur together, suspended in a single moment where nothing else mattered. But then reality crashed back in. The man she had been walking with pushed past her, his hands firm on the human's shoulders. "Get away from him," he snapped, pulling Kayla back. The man turned to her, his face grim. "Stay here," he said in a low, urgent voice. "Whatever you do, don't move." Kayla nodded without thinking, her entire being focused on the movement ahead. She felt a cold sweat on her skin as her eyes followed the shapes in the distance. The air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as though the very forest was holding its breath. The man moved forward, carefully, his steps silent as he crouched down near a large rock, his eyes locked on the moving shapes. Kayla wanted to follow him, to help him, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Fear? Curiosity? She wasn't sure, but in that moment, she realized just how out of place she was here. This world was nothing like the controlled environment she had grown up in. This world was wild, untamed, and full of danger. The Vanyari had always prided themselves on their peace, their intellect, their restraint. But here, among the humans, peace felt fleeting, and intellect often failed to keep them safe. The man signaled again for Kayla to stay put, and then disappeared into the brush. The moments stretched on, endless and suffocating. Every breath felt too loud in her ears. She could hear the distant sounds of the humans, still shouting, still in disarray. But now there was something else, A low growl, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. The predator was near. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest, and the fear from earlier surged back. Was it too late? Was the predator too close? She glanced toward the edge of the trees, her senses straining. She couldn't wait much longer. She had to do something. Before she could make a move, the growl turned into something else, a screech, high-pitched and terrifying. It echoed through the trees, and Kayla felt her blood freeze. The predator had found them. The man's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Get back! Now!" Without thinking, Kayla turned and ran, her legs moving faster than she had ever moved before. The predator was here, and she had no idea what it could do. But in that moment, all she could think about was the one thing that had driven her to this moment, the strange, undeniable pull between her and these humans. Whatever happened next, she knew this. Everything had changed. Kayla's feet pounded against the forest floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she sprinted away from the unseen predator. The sharp screech had shattered the tense silence, sending a jolt of panic through her. Her mind raced as she desperately tried to make sense of the situation. The wild creature, whatever it was closing in, but she couldn't afford to look back. The man had told her to run, to get to safety, but her heart was torn. She could feel the pull of the humans, the attraction she had begun to understand more and more, and it kept her from simply fleeing like a frightened animal. She heard branches snapping behind her, the growl growing louder. The predator was close, so close that the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Her legs were starting to burn from the effort, but she couldn't stop. The thick, damp air of the forest seemed to close in around her, making it hard to breathe. She could feel the sweat trickling down her spine, her pulse quickening with each passing moment. The trees blurred by in a dizzying haze of green, their twisted shapes seeming to reach out like clawed hands. But just when she thought she couldn't take another step, she heard it, a loud crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the ground. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was the man, the diplomat. But something was off. His usually calm, collected demeanor was now replaced by a frantic urgency, his eyes wide with fear. "Get down!" he shouted, throwing himself into Kayla, knocking her to the ground just as a massive shape leapt from the trees above them. Kayla gasped, her heart nearly leaping out of her chest as she twisted to avoid the giant claws that slashed through the air where she'd been standing. The creature's eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger, its fangs sharp and dripping with saliva as it snarled. Kayla's instincts kicked in, but they were too slow. The man reacted before she could even comprehend what was happening, pulling a weapon from his side, a strange metallic tool she had never seen before. The weapon hummed to life, glowing faintly as the man fired at the beast. The creature roared in pain, but it didn't retreat. It charged again, its massive form almost impossible to track in the flickering shadows. The man fired again, but the beast seemed to absorb the blow, almost shrugging it off, as if the creature was used to pain. "Move," the man growled, tugging Kayla to her feet. "We need to get to the others. Now." Kayla barely had time to register his words before the ground beneath her feet trembled and the screech of the predator filled the air once again. The creature wasn't alone. From the darkness of the forest, more shapes began to emerge, their eyes glowing with malice as they encircled the clearing. Kayla's heart raced. There was no escape. As the man dragged her through the underbrush, Kayla's mind spun. Why had the creature waited until now to strike? And why had it brought its pack with it? The humans weren't the only prey here. Something about the way the predator's eyes had locked onto her made her feel as though she were the true target. Was it the connection she had felt earlier? Was that what drew the creature to her? Suddenly, the answer hit her with the force of a lightning bolt. The predator wasn't just attacking randomly, it was hunting her. But why? What was it about her that made her a threat or a prize in its eyes? Before she could fully process the thought, the man pulled her behind a large boulder, their bodies pressed against the cold stone as the predators prowled closer. The creatures were relentless, moving with an eerie precision as if they knew exactly where their prey had gone. Kayla's breath hitched in her throat as she peeked around the edge of the rock. There, just a few feet away, she saw the glint of the predator's eyes locked onto hers. "Stay down," the man hissed, his voice tight with strain. "This isn't about us anymore. It's about you." Kayla felt the blood drain from her face. What did he mean? The human's words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. What was so special about her? What was it that the predator sensed that she didn't? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of a human voice, barely audible above the noise of the creatures. Kayla turned toward the sound, her heart leaping in her chest as she saw another figure emerging from the shadows, the human she had touched earlier, the one who had been caught in the chaos. He was alone now, his face pale and streaked with dirt, but his eyes locked on hers with a strange intensity. The predator, sensing the shift in the air, turned toward the human. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. Was the predator about to attack again? But instead of pouncing, the creature hesitated. It sniffed the air, its eyes never leaving the human. Kayla's pulse quickened. What was happening? Why had the predator stopped? Then, as if on cue, the human spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you are." The words sent a chill down Kayla's spine. The man was speaking to the predator, not with fear, but with certainty. It was as though he understood something that Kayla hadn't even considered. The tension in the air grew thicker, more oppressive. The predator tilted its head slightly, as though considering the human's words. "I know what you want," the human continued, stepping closer. "And I know how to stop it." Kayla's breath caught in her throat. What was happening? How did this human know what the creature was after? And how could he possibly think he could stop it? It was clear that they were all in grave danger, but the man's calm, almost eerie confidence made Kayla doubt everything she had believed about humans so far. There was something here, something in the way the human spoke, something in the predator's hesitation that she couldn't understand, but she felt it deep inside her. The man's words hung in the air as the predator, now silent, seemed to study him. And in that moment, Kayla realized something terrifying. The real conflict had only just begun. The creatures weren't just after her. They were after something far more dangerous. And the truth behind it was something neither she nor the humans were prepared to face. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the man took another step forward, his eyes never leaving the beast in front of him. Kayla could only watch, her heart pounding, as the predator's next move would determine everything. Would the man's confidence be enough to save them all? Or was this the beginning of something far darker than she could imagine? The silence stretched on, thick with tension, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. The tension was unbearable. The predator, still poised in front of the human, seemed to be calculating its next move. Kayla's breath caught in her chest as she waited for the beast to strike, her body frozen in place. She could feel the man's presence beside her, his eyes focused on the creature with a kind of resolve that sent a chill down her spine. There was something different about him, something far deeper than just a man fighting for survival. For a moment, the world seemed to slow. The growl of the predator reverberated in her ears, its sharp fangs gleaming under the pale light filtering through the trees. The human's voice was steady, unwavering as he spoke again. "I know what you're looking for, and I know how to end this." Kala's mind raced. What was he talking about? How could he possibly understand what was driving the creatures? He wasn't part of the Vanyari. He wasn't a diplomat. He was just a human, like all the others. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her question everything she thought she knew. The predator's eyes flickered between the human and Kyla, its nostrils flaring. The silence was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of the weapon the man had been carrying. Then, in a flash, the beast lunged. But it wasn't toward the human. No, it lunged straight at Kyla. Time seemed to freeze as the massive creature darted toward her. Her body reacted instinctively. She reached for the strange weapon the man had, her hands trembling. But before she could get a grip, the human was already there, throwing himself into the path of the predator. With a swift motion, he raised his arm, and in an instant, a brilliant burst of light exploded from the weapon, striking the creature square in the chest. The predator howled in agony, its form writhing as the blast sent it crashing into the ground. But it didn't stay down for long. It staggered back to its feet, furious, its eyes locked onto the human with an intensity that was almost calculating. Kayla's heart raced. What was happening? What was this weapon? And why was the predator targeting them now, so relentlessly? "Move, Kayla," the human shouted, dragging her to her feet with surprising strength. She stumbled, momentarily disoriented, but the man's grip tightened, pulling her away from the creature's line of sight. They ran, weaving through the trees, the sound of the predator's screeches echoing behind them. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the human suddenly stopped, his hand pulling Kayla behind a thick tree. He was breathing heavily, but his eyes were focused, calculating. "We can't run anymore," he said, his voice grim. "I need you to trust me." Kayla's pulse thudded in her ears. Trust him? How could she trust him after everything? He had already proven himself in ways she hadn't expected. He had stood between her and the beast, even when it was clear he was outmatched. She wasn't sure what to think, but she knew one thing: there was no other choice. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice strained. The human gave her a sharp, knowing look. "There's only one way we can stop this. We have to lure them into the open, where they won't have the cover of the trees. Then we strike." Kayla's eyes widened. "You want me to distract them?" the man interrupted, pulling a small device from his belt. "I'll use this to finish it." Before Kayla could protest, the human had already slipped away into the shadows, leaving her alone at the tree's edge. She watched him disappear into the darkness, her mind a whirlwind of questions. What was he planning? And why did he think this would work? Suddenly, the ground trembled again. The predator wasn't far behind. It wasn't just one beast anymore. There were more of them, their growls growing louder, more insistent. They had tracked them. They were getting closer. Kyla's heart raced as she glanced over her shoulder. She had no idea how to lure them out, but she couldn't just stand there. Without thinking, she sprinted into the open, her eyes scanning for any sign of the predators. She could feel them in the distance, their eyes on her. Her heart hammered in her chest as she forced herself to focus. In the distance, she saw movement. The predator. And just behind it, there was more. It was as if the creatures had been waiting for this moment. They circled her, eyes gleaming with hunger. But Kayla was no longer afraid. The strange attraction she had felt earlier, the inexplicable pull toward these humans, burned within her now like fire. She wasn't running anymore. She was ready to face this, whatever it was. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding light flashed across the clearing, and a sudden surge of energy hit the ground beneath her feet. The predators hissed, recoiling from the blast. Kayla turned to see the human, his weapon glowing brighter than before, charging toward the pack. The creatures lunged at him, but the human was faster. With a swift motion, he released another pulse from the weapon, a crackling wave of energy that sent the predators reeling. But it wasn't enough. More of them emerged from the trees, unfazed by the attacks. They were relentless. Kayla knew they couldn't keep this up forever. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she watched the human, desperation creeping into his movements. Was this it? Was this how it all ended? Then, just as the predator lunged for the human, a crack sounded in the trees. Another figure. This one wasn't human. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. It was another alien, not from her world, but from somewhere beyond. A being with an eerie, otherworldly presence. The creature didn't hesitate. It struck the predators with a speed and brutality that left Kayla breathless. It was chaos. Predators were sent flying in every direction. The human paused, staring in disbelief. But the alien didn't speak. It only glanced toward Kayla with an unreadable expression, then back at the predators, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. In a flash, the last of the creatures were defeated, scattered to the wind. Kayla couldn't believe it. The creature that had been hunting them wasn't what it seemed. There had been something else behind it all, something darker. And in the shadows, the truth was slowly coming to light. As the last of the predators scattered into the underbrush, Kayla stood frozen, her heart still racing in her chest. The alien who had appeared from nowhere now turned to face her, its eyes glowing with a subtle yet intense light. Its form was sleek, almost shimmering in the moonlight, its features more refined and ethereal than anything she had encountered in her travels across the galaxy. The air around it seemed to crackle with energy, as if the very atmosphere bowed to its presence. It was no longer just a fight for survival. It was something much more significant. The human beside her remained motionless, his weapon still in his hand, his face a mixture of awe and confusion. Kayla, too, felt a strange pull, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something far deeper, a realization that this moment wasn't just about her. It was about everything that had happened, all the unspoken things that had connected her to these humans, to this planet, and to the beings around her. For a moment, the world around her seemed to fade away. She looked at the alien, trying to decipher its intentions. The creature's gaze met hers, its expression unreadable, but there was something in its eyes. Recognition? Or perhaps something more. The human finally spoke, his voice cutting through the silence. "Who are you?" His tone was quiet, almost respectful, as though he knew this being was not something he could easily challenge or understand. The alien tilted its head, studying him. Its voice, when it came, was not what Kayla had expected. It was soft but rich, with a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through the air. "I am not what you believe, and neither are you." The words struck Kayla like a sudden gust of wind, blowing through her thoughts and leaving her reeling. She had felt the alien's power, but now, in its voice, she could hear something else, something ancient, something beyond even the most sophisticated races she had encountered. There was a deeper truth in the creature's words that she couldn't quite grasp, yet it spoke to something inside her, a truth she had only begun to understand. She stepped forward, her voice shaky but determined. "What do you mean? Who are you really?" The alien did not answer immediately. Instead, it took a step closer, its presence filling the clearing. It seemed to consider her for a long time, as though weighing her very being. Then, with a soft sigh, it spoke again, this time more calmly. "You are not the only one who has been watching, not the only one who has been searching." Kayla blinked, trying to absorb the gravity of the alien's words. "Searching for what?" she asked, feeling a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. This was no longer just about surviving or understanding the predators. This was about something much. The alien's eyes flickered toward the human. For the connection. The bond between the human and the Vanyari. Something that has been forgotten, buried deep within your history. The human stepped forward then, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "There's no connection between us. We're just different. We always have been." The alien nodded slowly, as if confirming something it had already known. "The history you know is only a fraction of the truth. There was a time, long before your recorded histories, when your people and mine shared a bond, a shared purpose, a shared destiny." Kayla's mind spun. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as pieces of a larger puzzle began to fall into place. The connection between the humans and her species, it was real. She had felt it since the moment she had first met the man, but she hadn't understood it, not fully. It wasn't just some odd attraction. It was a deeper, more profound connection. But the alien's words raised more questions than answers. "If that's true," Kayla asked, "then why has it been forgotten? Why hasn't anyone remembered?" The alien's gaze darkened. "Because the bond was broken. Long ago. And those who tried to mend it were silenced. The silence that followed was thick, the weight of the revelation pressing down on all of them." Kayla felt a chill run through her, but it wasn't from the cold. It was the realization that the history she thought she knew, the very foundation of her species, was built on lies, on omissions. The truth was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The human, too, seemed to be processing the alien's words, his face a mask of disbelief. "So you're saying we were once connected? That we've been forgotten?" His voice trailed off as though the idea was too much for him to fully grasp. The alien's eyes softened slightly, a hint of sorrow in them. "Not forgotten, just hidden. Truth has been lost, buried under centuries of fear and misunderstanding." Kayla turned away for a moment, her mind racing. She thought back to the feelings she had experienced when she first met the human, how there had been something inexplicably familiar about him. There had been a pull, a connection she couldn't explain. Now she understood. This wasn't just some random meeting. They had been drawn together for a reason, and that reason was far bigger than either of them. She looked back at the alien, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens now?" The alien was silent for a long time. Finally, it spoke, its voice low and steady. "Now, you must decide. Will you attempt to restore what was lost? Or will you allow it to remain forgotten, sealed away in the darkness?" Kayla's heart ached with the weight of the choice. Restoring the bond meant more than just reconnecting her species. With the humans, it meant uncovering truths that had been buried, truths that might change everything. But it also meant venturing into unknown territories, facing dangers that neither she nor the humans were prepared for. The man beside her seemed to read her thoughts. He turned to her, his face filled with determination. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. We're not alone in this anymore." The words struck Kayla like a blow to the chest. She had known, deep down, that this connection between them was more than just a fleeting attraction. It was something far deeper. And now, it was clear their fates were intertwined, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The alien regarded them both, its expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed as though it was measuring their resolve, assessing whether they were truly ready for the challenges that lay ahead. Then, with a single nod, it spoke again. "Then it begins," it said softly. "But know this, the road ahead will not be easy. There are those who will seek to prevent this connection from being restored. There are forces at work that will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried." Kayla's stomach tightened at the alien's words. She had known that the path they were about to walk would be fraught with danger, but hearing it spoken aloud made it all the more real. The human turned to her, his eyes filled with a newfound understanding. "We can handle whatever comes next, together." Kayla felt her heart swell with a mixture of relief and fear. For the first time, she truly believed that. They weren't just two strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were connected, bound by something much older than either of them. And no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them side by side. As the alien faded into the shadows, leaving them alone in the clearing, Kayla knew one thing for certain. Their journey was just beginning. The truth about their connection was waiting to be uncovered, and they would have to fight for it. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow over them. They were no longer just survivors. They were part of something much larger, something that would change the course of their futures and the future of their worlds forever. And as they walked forward, side by side, Kayla couldn't help but feel that the greatest challenge they would face was not the predators, not the enemies who sought to keep the truth hidden. It was understanding the depth of the bond they now shared. The truth was more complicated, more beautiful, and far more dangerous than either of them could ever have imagined. But it was their truth now, and they would face it together.